Compound words are a very interesting topic in Japanese, and coincidentally, they are very necessary. Compounds are so common that if you wanted to avoid them, you would actively have to try to do so. Basically, like trying to avoid an English sentence that has words longer than 5 letters. And being so common, there are obviously going to be some different categories in between. There's no way you can have 10,000 words and they all fit in the exact same template. That being said, some of those templates are actually really cool, but also bring up a few questions. And I'll get into some of those questions later, but first, and probably the most important part of the video, what is a compound word, or a jukugo? The word jukugo is made up of 2 kanji, ripen or refine, and word. They take 2 simpler words and transform them into a more ripe and fruitful word, in its most simpler form. They aren't really replacing anything, they more so add some depth in an area that was lacking it. The intent isn't to get rid of the words that are being combined, so calling those unripe is technically not great, but it's for the metaphor. More literally, they are refined words. Aside from being words combined into one, a lot of them use their onyomi readings, which makes assuming the reading of a compound a lot easier, thankfully. This doesn't go for all of them though. There are some that use their kunyomi readings, and some that are irregular, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Let's get into some of the categories though. The first and most simple is just 2 distinct kanji being combined in order to mean something more in depth. For instance, ryoko made up of going or journey and travel to mean travel. Dokusho combines read and book, reading a book. Kikoku is a combination of return and country and means returning to one's country. These don't really require explanations, I feel. They are super simple, which I quite like. There are some that aren't as easy to guess the meaning of, but I would say they are easy to remember at the very least, assuming you already know the meanings of the individual kanji and their readings. So I suppose it's not that simple. Benkyo, for instance, is pretty vague in terms of guessing, but after the first time seeing the connection between effort and strong, I think it's pretty solid. I believe it came from an older saying revolving around exerting oneself or striving to become stronger, both mentally and physically, which exert and strength does kind of add up to that. The previous group was kanji that have different meanings and add up to something new. However, there are also compounds that have very similar kanji adding up to a new, more refined word. While I normally think of these as easy, when I was writing this script, I realized that compared to having 2 different definitions that obviously add up to a certain meaning, these are a little bit more ambiguous. That doesn't go for all of them though. For instance, above and rise up means rising. Pretty simple. They aren't exactly the same, but they're close enough. These similar ones are not really that cool to me. I think it's pretty obvious why 2 words that have similar meanings might be put together and end up meaning the same thing. Though it does kind of bring up the question, if the 2 words are just going to mean the same thing in the end, why make a new word in the first place? It seems kind of pointless in that it would just make literacy harder to reach by adding more words, however it does make sense. One thing I've realized over time is that a lot of individual kanji have very broad general meanings, with a bunch of different specific meanings to pick from. When 2 of them are put together, it really specifies the meaning and takes away a lot of confusion. If you just used a single kanji, it might make the sentence too vague, so that is a huge reason for these jukugo. For instance, kibo, made up of hope and hope, can mean hope. Instead of using just one of them, which could have a variety of different meanings, when you use the compound, it is a lot more specific and the meaning becomes clear. For instance, another meaning for the first kanji could be rare, and used with sho, it makes the more precise meaning of scarcity. Another cool one is hakai, meaning destruction. Opposite of the last category are kanji that have opposite meanings and kind of retain their differences in the final word. They don't really combine the same way or as nicely as some of the other ones. Nonetheless, I think they are really cool in their own way. An example of this would be hinpu, meaning rich and poor. These are pretty cool as they seem to keep the difference between the words, all while combining them into one. Hinpu having the possible meaning rich or poor, but also a more combined meaning of wealth disparity is really unique to me. These become a little bit more clear when used in a sentence. Instead of separating the words, having them combined kind of shows that even when they are in the same place, they do have their differences still. Like in this sentence, if both a rich and poor person were in the same place looking at something, there would still be differences in what they see. Or maybe I just take these words way too non-literally. Another one that I like is zenaku, meaning good and evil, literally made up of good or virtuous and also bad or evil. Again, instead of being good and evil, it is the concept of good and evil or right and wrong. Kind of just more as a general thing, if that makes sense. Last one is shohai, meaning outcome, made up of victory and failure, which is pretty much the 2 options for any outcome, I guess, aside from a tie, I suppose. Also, similar to how these don't really combine the two kanji into a single meaning, but more so a concept of the two being together, this can happen with similar kanji. I didn't put this in the last category because the last one they kind of combine into one single word. However, unlike the compounds that use a super similar kanji, with these the meanings just don't get mixed. For instance, the word shimai means sisters collectively, with the nuance of an older and a younger sister. Same with fufu, meaning husband and wife. As I mentioned earlier, some Jukugo can have irregular readings. They won't really make sense if you just go look at the readings of each in a dictionary. These are referred to as Jukujikun. These are kanji compounds where the reading of the compound does not correspond to the reading of the individual characters. A good common example of this would be kyo, which is an irregular reading of the compound created from a native word. However, the onyomi reading of the individual kanji is konnichi. The irregular reading leads to the kanji not being able to be separated, at least with the same reading, since the reading is actually just associated with the pairing instead of the individual kanji. If they were separated, it would just go back to using their normal onyomi or kunyomi. This leads to the reading being neither kunyomi nor onyomi. At first, I thought of them as kunyomi since you always see kunyomi labeled as native and onyomi labeled as Chinese. However, kunyomi are the native readings of kanji in Japanese, though that only goes for the readings of individual kanji. These were created because when trying to find a way to write old native Japanese words in kanji, some of them were better written with multiple characters instead of just one. So the meaning of the two characters were taken into account, but the reading was basically just overwritten by what they were trying to write down. Another topic that's pretty similar to this is gikun. Although the creation is different, compared to them being created for the purpose of writing a Japanese word down while keeping the same pronunciation, these are a little bit less of a necessity. They allow an author to change the reading while keeping the kanji meanings the same, essentially allowing an author to display two things at once. These are made possible due to furigana. Without it, you would need to be told by the author or your book club or something like that. Compared to Jukujikun, these are less of a necessity and more of an optional thing to do for your artistic expression, or clarity in some cases. I wanted to go over some of the questions I've thought about when seeing these compound words. For instance, what actually makes these the same word? At first glance, it kind of just seems like two kanji have been glued together. However, there is a little bit more to it. 1, the words are fixed. If you swapped the words, it would lose the meaning, as it would not be the same word anymore. Also, the readings of the kanji can be dependent on the compound they are in, which becomes very clear with the irregular readings. And the last one, and probably the most solid, is that they are treated as one unit in a sentence. If they're being broken up mid-sentence, they were never a compound to begin with. Unless there is something artsy going on, I suppose. That is kind of my excuse for every single exception, just saying it's artsy. I said this video was going to be niche in the comment section of the last video, which this is kind of the opposite of niche, so I do apologize. Originally, it was supposed to be about kanji that are only allowed to be used in shrines, but that did not really work out. However, that's not because they're on some special blacklist. That's just because you already can't name your kid or business with a kanji if it's not on the lists. So yeah, the shrine kanji are obviously not going to be in there, and therefore you just can't name your kid or business with those. I don't know, it's kind of obvious. Anyways, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. I'm learning how to use my hands right now, if you can't tell. I'm learning how to human max. So anyways, thank you, bye bye, like and subscribe. Auf Wiedersehen.